Hello, hi, welcome to It's a Bit Off the Bus. Welcome back if you've listened before. Hi if you're new. I've actually been posting these on YouTube, so a lot of people actually viewed the last episode. So hello if you're one of those new people. Although also thank you because so many people in the YouTube comments were like, girl, this is too quiet. This is way too quiet. I don't understand how. I'm going to play around with the audio. But thank you to everyone who told me that because I really appreciate that because you can't make a podcast if no one can listen to it. Disclaimer before I start this episode, I am a bit unwell. Hence no episode last week because I was too unwell. I don't feel 100% top form, but I feel top form enough to be filming this because I missed this and I do feel like this will heal me. To set the foundations for this episode, basically, nothing will have you scouring random corners of the internet quite like being bored in a lecture. That was me all the time at uni. I would just be bored. And then one week, I was so bored in class that I was like, well, let me check what's going on Eventbrite. That like website that like tells you like local events in your area. Some crazy stuff going on in Edinburgh, by the way. But that's when I realised, oh my God, there's this like whole host of like book tours. Like, why am I not going to like book talks, book tours, book launches, whatever? So then got down that alleyway. And like genuinely months ago, I saw that this was coming up. This is like the book tour for Laura Bate's new book, which is called The New Age of Sexism. Laura Bates is the woman who wrote Men Who Hate Women. Phenomenal book. So I was like, okay, need to go to that. And I put it in my calendar. Thank fuck I did because I've got a terrible memory. And then it came up and I was like, oh, need to go to that. So I went to that a few weeks ago. That is the anchor for this episode because it's a phenomenal book. It's a phenomenal angle. It's something no one's talking about. Something not many people will understand until it's explained to you. So that's what I'm going to do today. Laura Bates' new book, I'm saying Laura Bates' new book is called The New Age of Sexism, and it says how the AI revolution is reinventing misogyny, which is interesting. Doesn't really give too much away of like what that actually means. I'll read you one of like the wee blurby bits on the back. So it says, through her usual fast-paced, well-researched and deeply compelling prose, Laura Bates examines how new technologies are rapidly moving the frontiers of sexism while emphasising just how crucial it is that we get ahead of the way these innovations impact women. We have to act now and there's no one better to direct us. She's basically really looking at like all these avenues of AI and technology such as like deepfakes, the metaverse, cyber brothels, like examining AI and technology from all these different avenues and basically talking about how it's reinventing new forms of sexism, new forms of misogyny, new forms of harms against women and continuing to uphold existing systems of misogyny and oppression against women and marginalised groups. And it's just the type of thing you would not really know about largely unless someone was talking about it, which is kind of what she was discussing at her book tour. She kind of likes to go down these avenues of like into corners of the internet, into sections that aren't really discussed. Like she did that with Men Who Hate Women. Men Who Hate Women largely is about like incel culture and the manosphere, but she was researching that at a time where it was not as widely spoken about. Like we're talking pre-adolescence because that was a lot of people's first insight into this. This woman was deep in incel culture, the manosphere corners of the internet, before this was like even like a term people really knew. That's what she kind of does, and I think what she's unpicking here is going to largely come out within the next few years. But what she's really talking about is how this is something we can still tackle now, like it's not too late. The whole book is such like an important, interesting read, but one of the chapters that really, really interested me on this is where she talks about like people's interaction with AI girlfriends, like AI women, like artificial intelligent women, whether they exist in like apps, whether that exists in the form of like a sex robot, like people's interaction with these forms of like AI women and largely like the abuse that these women are subjected to. I want to preface as well before I even get into this, and what she largely prefaced as well in her book tour, like these are not corners of the internet. The same way incel culture, manosphere, when she was in those corners of the internet, we described them as corners of the internet, and like I'm even guilty of doing that right now. It makes them seem like something small and like minute that doesn't, it's not really a thing. It's like, why are we talking about it? This isn't really a thing, but it's not. When you're not part of this community, when you don't involve yourself with these apps or these technologies or whatever, it seems like something that is so like devoid from society and it's not a big thing. But like alone, she talks about apps that are like AI girlfriends, like women in your pocket type vibe that you're picking the personality of, you're picking the design of, you're interacting with, you're having conversations with, you're telling what to do. These types of apps are downloaded by like hundreds of thousands of people like last year alone, a lot of which are men. The same way even like sex robots are not that devoid of society right now. And like a time, if we were to look at a timeline of sex robots, so this is technologically based people, largely women, that people will have sex with. By 2025, so where we're at right now, we're looking at the emergence of robot sex in affluent households. So your standardized society's not really hit us yet, but like that's not to say this is devoid of something that's actually happening. By 2030, virtual reality sex becoming as commonplace as browsing online porn. By 2035, in 10 years' time, widespread ownership of sex toys that interact with virtual reality. And then by 2050, predicted robot sex surpassing human-to-human sex in frequency. 25 years prior right now, that seems quite hard to believe. But then when you read things like this, it actually doesn't seem that hard to believe. So I just feel like the need to set that like tone going forward, that this is not something that just like rarely exists. Like we're not talking about something that like is not even part of society at all. Like this is something that's actively happening and unfolding in front of us. We just are in quite like the early-ish days. But yeah, a huge thing she looked into is how people are interacting with these like cyber forms of people, like girlfriends, like women people have sex with in the form of say sex robots, like how we're interacting with these people. And a huge thing that's like noted is the abuse like these women are subjected to, which is what we see in real life. We see women in real life, we see girlfriends, we see sex workers, we see women in and out of relationships, like we see girlfriends, we see women on the street being harassed, being abused, largely by men. Undoubtedly now we're seeing that again directed towards AI forms of women. And on surface level, you hearing this, if this is the first time you've at all been part of this conversation, is like, well, these aren't real people, like they're not real, like it's fine. Like why are we concerned about how an AI woman is being treated when we have human women being mistreated? Like let's not like redirect our focus in the wrong direction. But what Laura Bate is really arguing in this whole book, and specifically in that chapter, is that if we tolerate and allow abuse towards these like AI generated women, whether that be in an app, whether that be in the form of a sex robot, I'll argue even in the form of an Alexa, you are setting a standard of what's accepted. And I truly believe that is what will then seep into society. I truly believe what we like code into these systems, we are ultimately coding into society. So I kind of want to unpick that today. It's kind of off the back of Laura Bates talking about this in the form of like sex robots, cyber women largely. And I want to take that and like apply that a bit wider to society. But first, I genuinely really want to deep dive into what she found, because she's like such a good researcher. She's like a phenomenal woman. She gets so involved in her research. And again, this is quite an early form. It's not like we've got like cyber brothels everywhere, but there's a cyber brothel in Berlin that she went to. So a cyber brothel is kind of essentially a brothel, but it's sex dolls. It's like sex dolls. It's like robotic sex, and this is like a really fast evolving industry as well. So she was talking about how previously it used to get like sex dolls, and there would be like a sex worker like on the phone who you could interact with like in live time. But like AI technology is like working so fast that like now you're going to have sex robot sex dolls that you can interact with personally. Like it's like a one-to-one reaction. Like they're becoming more human, like they're becoming more responsive, they're becoming more realistic, which is exactly what we see with like ChatGPT, for example. Like that's a very digestible form. Something, I was about to say something you can interact with. And like the robotic sex industry is moving so fast. There's so much money being pumped into that. This is a massive sphere. So this is something we're likely going to see more of, like sex brothels. And there's one in Berlin that she went and visited. She went like very disguised. She didn't want to be like identifiable as a woman. She went in there. It was like appointment only, very like upstairs loft vibes. I don't think there was any human interaction there. And this is when it comes back to the whole viewpoint of like, well, these are not real women, because what you're able to do in these scenarios is be a lot more like, there's a lot more freedom in how you treat these like beings in the form of robot, in the form of sex dolls, coming back to the fact because they're not real women. And what you can do in a cyber brothel is be a bit more creative's not the word, but like creative in the sense of how you want these women to be presented to you, because you were able to put in requests. And just out of her own research, she was like interested to see, okay, if I request for the sex robot that I'm going to be like meeting in the cyber brothel to be in torn up clothes, would they do that for me? And she arrived having put that request in, and they had done that. So she walks in, this like sex robot is there in torn up clothes. They like did her request, and she was inspecting it, obviously from this lens of like how abused are these sex robots by customers, by people that come in and visit these or do whatever to these. And she noticed that the labia had been, she said she couldn't tell if it had been bitten or ripped off, but the labia had essentially been ripped off. And that really is one of the highest depictions of the abuse that these sex robots undergo. And at no point does she, nor would I, be able to like just throw out that, well, it's fine because these aren't real women, because I think this really speaks volumes of what we're going to normalize and accept of women in this like AI robotic form. And it terrifies me because we see the speed that like AI technologies, all of this whole industry is moving, and I just know that it's getting like more and more lifelike. We're going to get so close to human like, which is ultimately, I imagine, what they're striving for, specifically in a sexual like capacity. They will want these sex robot sex dolls to emulate humans as close as possible. And at what point is that line going to be so blurred? And by that point, if we have not coded anything into these dolls, anything into these systems that rejects abuse, rejects harm, are we not just going to code that into the users that that's acceptable, and then surely they're going to transfer that into society, into real women? Some will argue that in the case of like sex robot sex dolls specifically, and people who want to abuse them, then it's a good thing, because that whole notion of it's going to get it out of people's systems, like, oh, if a guy can abuse a sex robot instead of a sex woman, that's good because he can like redirect his harm onto her instead. But if anything, then is that just creating a space to allow that behaviour instead of trying to address that and like mitigate that in the first place, rather than creating a space to allow that? I also think if you were to view it from that lens, I would just view, well, you're creating a halfway point. I think if you could abuse a sex robot, if you could bite the labia off a sex robot, you've created a halfway point. I really don't think that is where that behaviour would end. If that's something someone has had the urge to want to do, and finally they have this safe space to do that in the form of a sex robot, you've created a halfway point. I really don't think you've created an end point to that urge, to that fixation, to that desire. I think you've created a halfway point, and that will ultimately escalate onto a real woman in that argument. And Laura Bate talks about that, the theory of escalation, how a lot of these behaviours can just be propelled by given like a vice, essentially. And then I was looking into like child sex robots, because that's a whole thing she mentions as well, how if you go on websites to like buy sex dolls, sex robots online, there's ones that like emulate childlike features, childlike bodies, like stood there with like dolls and stuff, like they're there to emulate children. Children's sex robots are banned. They're banned because it's like, well, ultimately the fear is that like perpetrators get them and then progress onto children, like the children are protected here. I was reading like a whole article called Exploring the Implications of Child Sex Dolls, and ultimately they are banned because of the theory of escalation, because of the theory of that normalising like child sexual abuse, enabling that, and the theory of that escalating onto a real child, and then it's real children that are of harm and at risk here. In this paper, that they argue that like sex dolls, specifically in this case like child sex dolls, will bridge the gap between fantasy and reality by allowing potential offenders to move from virtual to the physical world. So virtual, say, in the form of like media, in the form of pornography, images, videos of children, to like the physical realm. And who's to say that it'll stop there? If anything, I see dolls as like a halfway point. So when people bypass like sex robots, sex dolls, when we're looking in the like at women, like adult sex dolls, adult sex robots, if people look at that and see that as a good thing for potential offenders of abuse, mistreatment, harm to women, as it's like redirecting it onto like a non-living form, I would completely like rebuke that with, well, no, I think that again is bridging a gap, creating a middle point of that to then be escalated even further, instead of stamping that out at the urge or the potential offence. I took notes as I was getting my microbangs done. If you notice, I now have microbangs. I've just given up with like trying to keep books nice. Like I have just started like writing and annotating books physically because I like it. I do like that. But what she's basically questioning here, page 109, is, are advocates for sex robots right in essentially saying that the dolls themselves represent some degree of female freedom? essentially being a substitute to bear the brunt of male rage and violence while the rest of us escape, the rest of us being living women? Or are women in fact just becoming the robots, essentially becoming used and abused as robots, and that's ultimately going to just fuel this oppression and harm of us in the real life? Like, I do not think these are a good thing. I do not think these can be seen as a substitute, like she says, to bear the brunt of male rage and male harm. I think we just become one alongside them. And I want to take Alexa as a really good example to help try illustrate this, to try justify this. Like 2 years ago, my sister nannied for this like really rich fancy family in London, an au pair. The house had a lot of Alexas. It was one of those houses that was very like rigged up to like AI, because Alexas ultimately are like early form of AI, like that interactive technology where you're speaking to a robot. That's not a real person you're speaking to. The same way when you speak to Siri. And she noticed that the daughter spoke to Alexa so rudely. No manners, no politeness, like very rude, very snappy with Alexa. And then when my sister would take her out and about, say to the shops, say to restaurants or whatever, she noticed that the daughter spoke to service workers the same way. And I think that's like the clearest example of how the way we interact with AI, the way we interact with this technology will seep into society. And it will be service workers that are like the first to bear that impact. It'll be women, it'll be sex workers, it'll be these individuals that suffer the consequences of that, because it's often these individuals that these robots, these AI technologies are modelled after. And I think as AI continues to get more intelligent, as it continues to become more infiltrated into our life, like what we see Alexa, ChatGPT, all that becoming, as it becomes more intertwined with our life and it becomes more intelligent and it becomes more realistic, that line surely between AI and human interaction will become really, really blurred, because it'll so easily replicate it. And we see that even nowadays. Like, say you're like on a helpline getting help with like your Wi-Fi or something, or like a customer service. Like, we're getting to a point now where you're like, you don't know if you're speaking to a robot or a human. Like, I was on the phone to someone yesterday for like my lecky bill, and I genuinely did not know if I was speaking to a human or a robot. And it sounds silly being like, well, we should have been policing that little London girl for how she spoke to Alexa, but like we actually should be, because if we enable people to speak to AI robots, to Alexas, to Siris, or to like in that like abusive or harmful or impolite manner, if we tolerate that, that will just seep into society. That will begin to impact how people speak to people in public, people in service roles who somewhat emulate these roles of technology in their homes or in other aspects of life, because the line is becoming more blurred in between the two. And that's, I'm pretty sure, what we will see with abuse of like say sex robots and like within this like sexual relationship capacity. If people, largely men, are abusive to AI girlfriends on their phone, to sex robots in brothels, sex robots in their home, when that becomes normalised, which it is predicted to be, that will undoubtedly seep into how people then treat their girlfriends, treat new sexual partners, treat women on the street, treat their girlfriends. And one of the first, I think, to bear that brunt will be sex workers. If cyber sex brothels become more popularised, will people start treating sex workers with the same harm? And there's already research to say that sex workers are concerned about that. And again, like I was saying, this is like a very, very new topic. That's what Laura Bate is like writing about, and she's writing about it in the sense of being like, this is so new that there is still time to like reverse and code these systems and put better systems in place that ultimately will protect all these people. I think society is at harm, and I think, like I say, it's women, it's sex workers, it's service workers, it's marginalised groups who are going to be the first to bear this brunt. It's not the men who are coding these systems. The men with so much money and power in the technological field are not really the ones that are going to suffer. They're the ones that will benefit from everything they're creating. But yeah, my concern is, so as these get smarter, as these get more realistic, as these get more human-like, which is ultimately, I think, what so much of AI is striving to be, is wanting to replicate human jobs, human interaction. As they get so much better and smarter and realistic, that line will become so blurred between human and AI. And if we normalise treating AI with disrespect, with harm, with abuse, and we code that into those systems and code that into ourselves, we're ultimately going to code that into society. And I know this sounds silly. I feel almost conspiracy theorist coming on and saying this, but it's not. Like, I feel like Shane Dawson and fucking Chuck E. Cheese coming on and being like, guys, if we treat the AI robots with abuse, we are going to be abused. But like, it's true. Like, this does check out. We have, like, I still feel conspiracy theorist. You know what the words I'm trying to say? It's saying that, but, like, it's true. We're seeing it. We're seeing it in micro forms. We're seeing it in more macro forms. This is going to seep into society. I feel like this will be quite a short episode for me. I feel a bit illish, but I really want this to just be an introduction to this topic. This is not at all like an ad or anything for this book. I feel like that is clear enough already, but I really do think you should go read it and research this, because this is something that's like unfolding and happening in front of us. And I just kind of want to let this be an introduction to the topic, but it is a very heavy one, and it is one you need to go and read and like understand yourself. But I hope this has been like somewhat straightforward. I feel like my worry with like doing this episode on the bus this morning is I was like, I need to talk about that in 3 minutes on the bus. I feel like it takes 3 minutes to give the groundwork to people. Like, when I talk about my episodes with like my friends and like people in my life, like they'll always be like, what are you talking about this week? And it always took me like a good descriptor to like even people to be like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Like, when I started like talking about this topic to people for the first time, they were always so confused, and I had to lay so much groundwork. So I really don't know how much this will even be understood. But the good thing to take away from like the topic in the book is Laura Bates, like the author, really talks about how there is time to change this. She calls this book like a call to action, because as much as this is like unfolding in front of us, we are still in the very early stages of like the AI revolution. And she speaks so much of how we can like still code these systems to like respond better, to like put things in place to like prevent harm, to prevent abuse, to stop things before they happen, essentially. She talks about how like systems and policies and technologies are still being made. If the safety of women is considered within these, it will prevent like the mass harm of women, and ultimately then that's seeping into society. Like, we're pretty far gone with like how people speak to Alexa, but in like say this whole like revolution, even just in within like the AI sex, like the virtual reality sex, like all of this, these systems are still being made. And if there's the right people in the creation of these, and the right consideration, the right lenses of like say intersectionality and protection and of women in these spaces, then like we can create these systems that ultimately should be able to benefit society, but in a way that's not at the detriment of women, not at the detriment of, say, sex workers. Things are being done, and it is not too early. Like, even, this is so fitting, like, even earlier, I got an email from a woman who is, like, the lead cohort, saying she's focusing on artificial intelligence and exploring how it's a gendered issue, and they're doing work to develop, like, resources and everything to help signpost and create helplines and help women in the production of this type of technology. She emailed me today being like, do you want to be on board? It's like a Scotland-led project. Like I say, things are being done, policies are being put in place, these discussions are being had. But yeah, this book ultimately serves as a call to action, and I'm fucking glad she did have that, because it's just not the type of thing that we would really know otherwise. And I just remember back to when my sister told me that about the girl like speaking to Alexa so badly, and how that was like impacting her behaviour to real humans. Like, really wanting to talk about that and not to be on the bus, but I was like, I can't do a taboo solely alone on like, guys, we need to stop speaking to Alexa like dirt. But then this book has helped me see how much that is part of a wider conversation, and the way technology is moving like this is actually part of like a wider issue that's going to impact society. So yeah, thank you for listening. I hope that made somewhat sense. I feel like that's going to be a short episode. I'm going to stop this and go to sleep. I hope the audio's been better in this one. I'm going to play around with it so it's louder, because I know a good few people picked up on that, and I'm so sorry. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong, but I maybe just need to, I'll figure it out. But anyway, all my love to you, and I'll see you soon.